Alright guys, we're back. Finishing up this build, almost done. Got the motor getting ready to go in. Like I said in the earlier videos, I'm running the Van Dalen, not exactly sure the engine mount that they sell, not exactly sure the name, but I got my mounts on the motor already. Gonna now be putting the clutch on. So earlier we built the clutch. Now I'm gonna show what I do. I do something a little bit different. I use a little collet shim. It's not a really thin one, but I don't know, kind of collet shims. There's like 3 different sizes. I would say I use like the medium size. I put one collet shim on, then the collet. Every time I'm putting something on, I'm trying to kind of pull the crankshaft back out, and then put your flywheel on, and here's where you want to pull on the crankshaft, push back on the flywheel, lock it into place, because sometimes if you have your crankshaft pushed in and you put everything on, that your crankshaft might move back and forth, which could damage your engine. You definitely don't want to do that. And then go ahead, put the clutch nut on. Well, actually, I don't think I've put any. I put like a tiny bit of blue Loctite on my crankshaft. Not much, just a tiny little bit to get in those threads. This engine, I haven't done that yet. Make sure you're putting pressure on that flywheel as you put it. Feel it, no movement. I'm going to go ahead, tighten it down. This you want to have pretty darn tight. No play at all, no movement on there. Flywheel is now on. We'll move on to the clutch bell. I run those Van Dalen mounts because it moves the motor forward just a little bit, and then I can use a vented bell. I just use the Team Associated bell. Don't really do this all the time, but I know it's going to be hot out there, and I know the final is going to be an hour, so I really want to have a vented bell. So that's mainly why I'm doing this, so I can have a vented bell on this thing. Use some motor spray. With any clutch bell, you want to clean out the inside with some motor spray. Just kind of like I've said in this video with the other parts, there's just like machine oil and stuff on there. And you have to shim this a little bit different. Since I'm using a different style bell, I have to put on a bunch of clutch shims first before I put my first bearing on. So I don't really know the exact amount. So I'm just gonna kind of guess here. And I'll show you the couple things you look for when you are spacing out your clutch bell. So first thing you do, put it on, see if it's rubbing. You probably can't hear it, but it is touching the flywheel. So I need more shims. Put a couple more on. Now it's spinning good and free. Then I look for the gap from behind the clutch bell to the flywheel. You don't want that too big because you want the shoe to be biting on the correct part of the clutch bell. So there's a little bit of a fine line there between, you know, obviously being too close to the flywheel where it's rubbing and then being too far away from the flywheel. Put the other bearing on, and just with this setup, I kind of know that it's going to be really close to being flush. I don't really run any shims on my screw. Another thing that I do different, the kit says to run this little, I don't know, washer thing, kind of has a little edge on the end of it, and you put a flathead screw in. I don't like doing that because I want my clutch bell to be held on with a 2.5 wrench. So I just use a cap head screw. This is a 3x10 cap head screw. And then what I put on is 2 of those steel shims. So if you've watched this whole build, you will realize I use a lot of those little steel shims. They're super handy. They work really good. Put a little bit of blue Loctite on this. When I take this in and out, I won't put Loctite on there, but since it's a new screw, I just put Loctite on it one time. Gonna run that in, and then we check how our spacing is with our clutch bell. That actually feels pretty good. You don't want it too loose, but you really don't want it tight. Make sure your bearings are all the way seated. Sometimes, especially in the Tekno bell with the big bearing on the inside, I find that maybe those bearings aren't all the way seated, and sometimes it will feel like it's tight, and you'll kind of mess with the shimming, and then you need to make sure the bearing is all the way seated in there right, so that you don't accidentally take a bunch of shims out thinking it needs more play, and then when it seats, then you have a ton of play. So it can just move a little bit back and forth, spin super free. That is exactly what you're looking for. And we'll just tighten this down good and tight. Actually, I'm gonna add thin shim on that. You can kind of do a shim on either side of the clutch bell, but I kind of know with this setup that I've been running with no shims on my screw, so I'm going to do all my shimming on the inside. And now we'll try that. Yeah, there we go. Just a little bit of movement. And if you're running, your engine's quite a while, things like that, you have multiple engines, it's a good idea, I would say every couple months, to just change out the screw that you put going into the crankshaft, because you can twist those heads off and snap those screws off, which is a really big bummer because it gets stuck in your crankshaft. Sometimes you can get it out, sometimes you can't. So it's just a good idea just to replace those screws every once in a while. Just kind of, precaution. Now we have clutch all on, motor looking good. We're going to move on to the air filter. Crack open this bag. We got the new 90 boot that Tekno's using. They're still using the actual air filter housing is the same. Air filter is the same, just a 90 boot. I'm gonna run a little bit of tire glue around the air filter housing. Pop this in to place. And the glue was still kind of wet. I just kind of rotated it so that cross will be kind of up and down, just so I can key it in a little bit easier. But I like to glue those on, just a little safety precaution. I'm going to use a little bit bigger zip tie. You can use the kit zip ties. You can kind of see the size difference there. You want these to be really tight, really snug. So for me personally, I put a bigger zip tie on there. Grab some pliers, tighten that up, snip the excess off. Oh yeah, we're looking good. Grab me a paper towel, and I use Ultimate Racing air filters. I feel like their oil is really good. The filter I feel like works really good. It's not, the pores aren't too open, and they fit pretty snug together too. Sometimes the outer one with some air filters can be a little bit loose. So with this is the Tekno or the TLR filter. They're the same size, so they'll be kind of labeled as both of those. So I fold my towel in half, put the filter in, wrap it around, and then just squeeze it out really hard, kind of rolling it around in my hand, trying to get all that extra oil off. This oil is really good and sticky. As you can see, got some excess off. Still really dark in color, and that thing is good to go. Go ahead, slide that over. Anytime you're changing air filters, especially at the track, you want to be really careful not to get dirt in there. Make sure everything is seated properly. And then, like I said, there's kind of like that cross design. You want to get that lined up. And then just going to use a tie screw here. Just a button head. All right, got that in there. Looking good. I will go ahead and put it on the motor. Again, gonna use a little bit bigger zip tie. Just like the other one, you want to get these really tight. I've seen some people, they put them on so that you can twist your filter around, even like pop your filter off if you pull it. My opinion on that is That's not a good idea. I want those things super, super tight. All right, this motor is set. I'm gonna put a little bit of Loctite on these motor mount screws, blue Loctite. And then it's time to bolt the motor in. Yeah. This car's looking pretty awesome. All right. So my lower mounts are loose. I kind of snugged up my upper mounts, not super tight. Put the motor mount screws in. So if you're using just the standard Tekno motor mount, you would have, you know, obviously the motor mount on the bottom. Wow. What I got going on here? So you would have your motor mount screws in the bottom, they would be loose, and then you would just be putting your motor mount screws in through the actual case of the motor into the top of those engine mounts. And my recommendation would be to kind of, you know, lightly snug up on the top of the engine, and then you're gonna, you know, set the mesh with the bottom. And after you kind of get that close, if you had to fine tune it or anything, you would kind of use the top, because you know, you have a little bit of wiggle room on the top. What I have found with the Tekno car, most cars actually in general, is when if you loosen up the top of the engine mounts and you're kind of, you know, you have that little bit of wiggle room. If I have it twisted more to the inside of the car as I'm running, I feel like it will kind of twist more to the out. So I try to kind of set mine more twisted to the outside, because I've never had it move the other way. So then my gear mesh definitely won't like move during a race. So what I kind of do is I put it in there, I'll kind of snug the bottom mounts up just a little bit, loosen the top, kind of twist the engine to the outside, tighten down those top mounts, and then set my mesh through the bottom. So this is a little bit different, so I won't quite be using that method. But that's what I have found works really well with the stock mounts. Go ahead, put my throttle ball on there. I already bound my radio and everything to the car. Got my servos all centered up already, so I won't really be showing that, but the key thing you want to do is when making a new model, have your servo horns off, get your radio all bound up, so that, you know, if it's not centered, you're not like tweaking your servo when you turn the car on. Yeah, get it centered up with the trims and everything like that, and then go ahead and get your servo horns on. I actually won't be tightening my throttle because I'm gonna have to pull my top deck off to trim all of those linkages because we have all that excess. So now I'm just working to set the mesh. You don't want it too tight. You don't want it too loose. You want just a little bit of backlash in the gears. Trying to get these set the first time is always a little bit tricky. You gotta be pretty gentle tightening the bottom, because I feel like, you know, if you kind of get after it too much, it'll move on you. Brand new gears, I mean, you kind of, you know, set it where there's just a little bit of a click. You know, you definitely don't want to have it tight, but you don't want to set it on the loose side either. So this part's always a little bit tricky. Just gonna gently snug these. And I try looking at like the side with the 3 holes and just make sure it's pretty straight. Sometimes you can get your engine and they're kind of crooked. Your gear mesh can feel good, but your engine's a little crooked in there, so you're gonna have like a weird wear. Man, my mesh is so close, but it's like a hair looser than what I would really prefer. I know what's going to happen. I'm going to go to move it, and I'm going to get it a little too tight. And I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to end up looser than where I am right now. Alright, barely got it to move. And it's too tight. Oh, there we go. Alright, be careful tightening these up. I don't want it to move. Once we get them fairly snug, then you know it's not going to move anymore. Then we can start cranking on it. Spin it around a little bit, checking the mesh. Oh yeah, that feels good. So what you do, I hold the clutch belt with my finger and then just move the spur gear a little bit. Might be able to hear that. A little clicking. So little tiny bit of backlash in there. Spinning nice and free. Sounds really good. You can kind of tell when your mesh is right just by the sound. I'm going to stand up here, so my head's going to disappear. Now I'm going to be able to crank on these, tighten a couple just down with my hand, make sure they don't move. I'm going to put my JTP T-handle on, and remember these screws all got red Loctite. If you ever have to move these, re-Loctite them. Even if you want to check them for a main or something like that, you should loosen them and put on the red Loctite. Alright, that is looking awesome. Engine is in. Now what I'm going to do, take my linkage off and clean it up. You can see I got excess hanging off, and we'll join back in after that. Alright guys, we're back. I have the linkage all cleaned up. No excess wire sticking out or anything like that. It's looking super clean, how it should. Gonna go ahead, put that back on, get my servo horn lined up straight, get my throttle ball popped on. I can go ahead, put my servo horn on now, tighten it down. I'll show you some other key things. When you're setting your linkage at neutral, you want your servo horn to be straight with the servo, and when you're setting your ball for your carb, you kind of look through the back here. You can't really see it there, but you want your throttle linkage to be totally flat and straight, not pulling at an angle, because you can damage your carburetor that way. So you adjust your carburetor ball, you know, to the right spot so that it will be pulled straight. I'm gonna go ahead, put these top plate screws on, not running them all the way down. I think this is why some people put their air filter on loose, so they can kind of get into those screws. If you have it nice and tight, you can just kind of bend it around, move it around. Don't run these all the way down with the drill, because I want to feel them with my hand. I'll snug them all down. I kind of just, it feels free, but I just back the screw out like quarter turn, half turn, just a little tiny bit. That feels good. Forgot to put my screw in my pinch bolt and my steering servo horn. So I'll go ahead and put that in. Since I got that servo all lined up, centered, ready to go. Now, next thing before we put the pipe on is we'll put, well, actually, yeah, we'll do the pipe next. Got the pipe mount, pipe hanger wire, little 4mm screw there. Gonna use red Loctite. Shake it up a little bit. Get some red Loctite on those threads. Put it in my finger. Get those threads all coated in the Loctite. And I'll get this set screw. I use blue Loctite on this set screw for the wire. Put that in through the top. Not gonna really tighten that down till I get the wire in there. Trying to work sitting down is difficult for me. I always stand up when I work on my cars, so this is a bit of a challenge. but when I was trying to do it standing up, it was hard to get everything in the shot, and I feel like the video would be kind of far away. Alright, so I kind of just got it in there loose. Gonna put the pipe on. OS 2090. I use just kind of a little spit off my finger. It's kind of gross, but I always have it. So I do that, put on the gasket. Maybe that's why my gaskets last so long. Gonna put some pipe springs on. One and two. Oh yeah, that thing went on nice and good. Now, since my pipe hanger is all loose, I can make sure, get it in the right spot, and when I get my height where I want, I'll go ahead, tighten that down. This isn't a brand new pipe, but I put some blue Loctite on that set screw as well. Slide that in just a little. Try to keep my pipe good and straight. It's not right up against the edge of the mud guard there, and you obviously don't want it too far in where it's touching the tank. Tighten that up. After we get the tank in, I'll fully be able to tell if that's in the right spot, and then I'll really give that bottom a crank. So got the tank ready to go in. Like I said, I was going to show you guys what I do for my tank pole. So you need 2 zip ties. I cut this one already, but I'm gonna bend the end of this, make a U shape, and then go in this first hole around that bar and out the second hole. So that's why I do this U shape here. So you can see I'm in the first one, out the second one, going around that bar. Run it through. Tighten it down good. It's kind of hard to see with the white, but goes up and down. And then I'm going to use some fuel line. Cut a little bit of fuel line off. It's probably about 10 mil or so. Put it on. And then I'm going to put the other zip tie on the top. Trim that one some so it's a nice, good kind of handle for your pit guy. Voila, fuel line, and then your kind of handle on the end. Not going to trim it yet until I put it in there. I'm going to use some tie screws, put my tank in. as you start to tighten this down, you'll see that the rubber on the top will kind of start expanding, kind of widening out. That's when you're getting it tight. These tanks, there's certain tanks where like you tighten them really tight, they'll crack. These tanks aren't going to crack on you, but you still don't want to fully lock it in really tight, you know. It's got a little bit of movement, no up and down play. I'm going to pull that zip tie back a little bit. So it needs to be kind of the correct length, so you're coming for a pit. They have the hand on the front shock tower. You can open it up. Boom. That looks pretty good there. Man, this thing is looking like a racing vehicle. So now, really last step here, fuel line. Using my JTP black fuel line, of course. It works extremely well. There we go. Sorry, it's a little bit hard with the angle I have. Gonna trim that off. Actually trim that very poorly. You want to make sure when you cut your fuel line that it's good and straight across, so it's not all at an angle, so it can go fully on. Alright, that's going on really good there. Got a little bit too much. Actually going to run that through the bottom hole. Trim that up just a little bit more. This fuel line's awesome. It's pretty small, the internal hole there. So it really stays on those nipples pretty strong. Should have put it on my pipe first. I'm gonna pop my pipe up, get it kind of out of the way, make sure it's nice and a flat cut. Get that on there. Put my pipe back down. Alright, so pressure line, I run it up through the fuel line coming out of the tank. I'll go through this bottom mount and I'll loop it up, trim it right there. And here's kind of a make sure that's good, a trick that I do. When I go to put it on here, I'll twist the line a little bit when I put it on. And this new line is tight. Twist it some when I put it on, so then the line actually stays pushed down onto the top of the tank, so that when the body goes on, you're not having to worry about it rubbing too much. And voila, just like that. We got the fuel line on. Man, this thing's looking like a race car ready to hit the track. Let's throw some tires on this thing, actually. Can't believe we're putting tires on. Of course, I run one red wheel nut, just because I do. Run gray on these other wheel nuts. Really like the Tekno captured wheel nuts. Feel like they work really good. Stay on nice and tight. They're serrated on the back side. Putting me some soft double downs, aka soft compound double downs on. Next thing is the wing. Gotta put the nuts in there, which can sometimes be a pain. I just kind of put them in with my fingertips, kind of turn them around, push it in with my fingertip there, because you know the point is going to be sticking out when it's lined up. Boom, pop that in. I'll use a 1.5, go into the top, make sure that nut went all the way in, throw my wing on, wing screws, oh man, just like that, we have ourselves a race ride. Look at that thing. So stoked. Get everything off the setup board here. Oh, first time get to feel those shocks. So I kind of just, you know, when I was building it, I was kind of eyeballing the camber links and such. So they're actually fairly close. If you know me very well, you know I don't use a camber gauge. So I'll definitely not be putting a camber gauge on this car, because I just don't really use them. Just kind of get it eyeball close here. If you look at any of my setup sheets, my ride height is always full tank of fuel, no body. So I'm just not gonna throw any gas in it right now. Don't have fuel sitting here on my table, but just get a decent idea. I just kind of ballparked where these shock collars are gonna be. If you notice, with the shock collar O-ring mod, my shock collars are moving super easy, super smooth, no stress at all. So you want to kind of eyeball your ride height. Not eyeball your ride height. Get your ride height before you really start jacking with your camber and toe. Go 23 front, 27 rear. How I do my ride height, I pump the shocks up, drop it, give it just a little roll when it lands. I don't do any extra pushes or anything like that. Like pushing down on the car, I mean. Because I feel like when you do that, your ride height will be pretty inconsistent, because like new tires are going to be a little bit more sticky, and if you don't really roll the car, depending on your camber setup, your scrub of your tires is different, and your ride height can be pretty far off and pretty difficult to set. So right there, ride height's pretty much set. I think the camber is super close. I'm gonna go ahead, turn my radio on, and show you guys how I get my radio all set up, and we're ready to hit the track. Alright guys, we're back. I got my car on. Gonna show you how I set up my linkage. We'll start with the throttle linkage. I already have my sub trim kind of set where it's centered. Like I said, you really want it to be running the same parallel to your servo, so that's pretty close. I'm gonna actually move it just a little bit. I kind of know where my settings are on my EPA, so I have them turned down. Throttle 45, brake 45. We'll go ahead, start with the throttle first. So first what I want to do is set my deadband. You can see if I'm barely touching my throttle, carburetor is not quite opened up, and then we'll check the pole. So I already have my air filter on. That's kind of how I do it. I don't really measure it. I'm running a 6.5, and so I kind of just know where it needs to be, where I like it. So I'm just checking my EPA to see. Right there is about where I run with a 6.5. I ended up at 65 on my EPA. And now for the brake, you set this collar with this spring here so that when you're at full brake, you can still open your carbs some. If you have that spring completely compressed, you can damage your throttle servo. So now I'm just gonna roll the car a little bit, start easing onto the brakes. See when my brakes start kicking on, and they're pretty even. My rear may be kicking on sooner than my front, but I'm pretty far into my trigger, over like half. So I'm gonna have my brakes kick on a little sooner. So I'm gonna move this brake linkage this direction. So I'm going back to have my brakes kick on sooner. I'm gonna go one turn, front and rear. And this is why when I built this linkage, I ran these rods through a bunch of times so that they're not really hard to twist. So I'm not hurting my fingers, and if they're really hard to twist, sometimes they'll just spin on these rods and you can't actually adjust it. So right now I'm setting when my brakes kick on. That was actually a pretty big movement because when you have this spring and the fuel line, it's a little bit more sensitive on when they're going to kick on. So I'm going to go a half turn the other way. It will change once you drive a little bit. This is just the initial. That actually feels really good. They're kicking on within that first quarter of trigger going forward. So now I'm going to feel my brake force, how strong my brakes are. I'm going to push my brake all the way on. Feel the front. I'm hoping they feel the same, because you really want your brakes to kick on at the same time and feel the same if you're running 50-50, which I tend to run 50-50. So with that, you want to make sure that your fuel line that you're using is cut very, very close to the same size, because if one is longer than the other, you might have them kick on the same, but then the pressure is going to feel different. A longer pressure line is going to be stronger. A shorter pressure line is going to be a little bit weaker on the brakes. So that can be like your brakes are kicking on at the same time, but say your front's stronger or your back's stronger. One of those, the fuel line's probably not the same length. So that's actually really good. I need a little bit stronger brakes. Like I said, all this stuff is new, so after you run it a little, you're gonna have to recheck all that. So I upped it. I'm at 55% now, and I feel like when you run this spring and the fuel line set up, you can actually run a little bit higher EPA, and gives you a little bit more of like a trigger feel with the actual trigger on your radio, which I like. So that's kind of why I run that setup. I feel like it gives me a really good linear brake feel. Now with the 55%, I'm going to push my brake all the way on, make sure my carb still moves. I still have plenty of room there, so that's really good. So my throttle is set. Now I'm going to move on to checking the steering. The steering you want to do when the car is on the ground. Gonna check my camber a little bit and my toe a little bit here as well, because if you're setting that without that set, it's going to be a little bit difficult. With the Tekno cars, you want to roll your car forward to check your camber. So since I have a good view back here, I'm going to do my rear as well. I run just a little bit of camber, like I said earlier. I don't use a camber gauge. I feel like our cambers move so much when you roll your car forward and back. Not Tekno cars in general, just RC cars in general. That trying to put a gauge on, it's, I mean, you move your car around some, you're like, it moves a ton. I kind of found that out when I got one of the digital camber gauges, and I was trying to set my camber, and it was moving like 6 degrees when I just rolled my car forward and back a little, and that was actually with a Kyosho 2-wheel drive car. And so I was like, man, this is kind of silly. All right, my front camber is really close. My front toe is really close. So now I'm gonna move on into doing the steering EPA. And one thing that I didn't really talk about is, if you look right here, you want to set your steering length, steering rod length, so that this horn and this bell crank here, well, this is the bell crank, but this thing popping out of your servo saver is parallel. So your horn and that parallel. So that's what you set your steering length to. And you want your car on the ground, steer it kind of slow. I actually have too much throw here. I'm gonna turn those down some. I go full lock, then I'm going to grab the wheel, see how much pressure's on there, and just at full lock, see if my tire moves at all when I make little adjustments. You want that same pressure at full lock on both sides. Kind of move it around a little. Recheck it. Got good tension at full lock. Go this way. Good tension on full lock. And man, we're set. That's pretty much it. Brake linkage is set. Throttle's all set. Steering EPA set. Ride height is closely set. Once I get to the track, I'll be outside. You know, I'm inside right now, so it's a little bit cooler. So we just kind of, you know, baseline set it, go to the track. This thing's going to be ready to go. NB 2.1, world's car, built. All right, guys, here at Fastlane, I got my brand new Tekno NB48 2.1 all built up. Hasn't even hit the track yet. We're gonna show you guys first laps with it, see how she works. First laps, make sure my brakes and stuff are working right. Brand new drivetrain, so cars don't work super awesome. Brand new drivetrain. As you can tell, it's going around all right. My brakes are actually really strong. So I'm going to turn that down a little bit. There we go. As you can see with the new car, they squat a little bit more than normal, because you need them to wear in a little bit, create that bind. Man, not too bad for the first couple laps here. Turn my brakes too far down. There we go. Man, that NO4R JTP engine's running good. Some people are asking how much time I give my new cars to break in. I think they need, you know, a good whole day's worth of running on it. Brand new drivetrain takes, you know, a good hour or so before it really starts working how it should. So I'll put some time on this car and it'll be all ready for Spain. But man, pretty darn legit for the first couple laps with a brand new fresh build. Ready to rock.